working its way south to this new treatment plant. And from there, there will be a regional pipeline that is paid into by all of the communities east of Central Weld that want to be connected to NISP, to connect us and connect our partners to the east. So that's something that will come online as part of the NISP project. On the other side, Central Weld does have an existing line under the river up into our system that we could interconnect to. The issue is it is undersized. So they do have some customers across the river kind of in our general utility territory, as we discussed in the annexation conversation. So that line serves some of their existing customers. We need to upsize that line if we were to buy into Central Weld's plan or have them doing some of our treatment capacity. The holding pattern, or the reason that there's been negotiations, is there are Central Weld customers along that pipeline route that Central Weld has expressed interest in us taking on. However, they don't want to provide the dedicated water rights to serve those customers. So we just have had a lot of back and forths with Rick Picard, our water resource engineer, and them trying to figure out, how we can make this all happen, potentially take their customers, find a balance with the water dedication, upsize the line and connect it.
How much will it actually cost to upsize that line? Because here's my concern on this. We're going to be spending, if you go back to that slide, we'll just call it $4.5 million. Five, actually, a little over $5 million that it's going to cost us over the next, started in maybe 26 through 29. That's money that we set aside, but it's also going to be eventually be passed on. We already have people complaining about the rate structure now and the price of water already as we've implemented those new tiers. And this is only going to cost them more in the long run over the next couple of years. How much will it cost to probably upsize those lines, and will it save us money if we did that to alleviate passing on a lot larger increases?
Yeah, I'd have to check with engineering on the specific cost of the estimated pipeline. It varies depending on the specific size and orientation and how we handle some of the existing customers. But I want to say it was somewhere in that $6 to $10 million connection cost. The nice part is, we feel like we're paying Greeley this one-time fee and not getting anything out of it, but we are in perpetuity locking up that treatment capacity, so it is expensive. But basically, they're going to get to a point where they need to expand their treatment plant. We're paying into that to have access to that water. When we connect to Central Weld and we buy into their shares, it'll be the same thing. The bigger reliance is by diversification. We could, in theory, have more resilience on a second system. So if Greeley has issues, we're connected for probably what'll amount to around the same price when all is said and done. On the NISP side, I mean, it's kind of own conversation. We're bought into that system. We're not going to have any choice but to buy into that plant. So it's trying to figure out that balance of that pipeline and connecting to it. Do we extend that pipeline up when that's built in X amount of years, or do we upsize now and then connect the upsize line to that? It's kind of really, there's a lot of partners and a lot to figure out, but Rick is taking this very seriously, and we'll hand this over to our new city engineer here at the end of the month with Rick planning to kind of phase out.
So another question is why is it so difficult for us to negotiate with Greeley to get our cap level raised?
I think it's easy to get the cap level raised. They are charging what they're considering a fair value to buy into their system. We're basically paying their system development charges. When I was working for the city, they were upset that Evans was getting an advantageous rate in terms of what they were paying to buy into our system in perpetuity. So I don't think by any means the city's getting a bad deal. Water infrastructure and water treatment's just very expensive.
Their water treatment is self-sustaining. It literally pays for itself. Like, they don't even have to put any money towards it. And so with that said, it's like, it'd be great to negotiate something considering that we're like next to them. And I know in the past it was discussed that maybe the smaller cities would go in on actually maybe creating our own plant. But I mean, those were just talks, but it just seems that I feel like we should have a conversation with them and see what we can negotiate with them, because again, it's like they don't spend any money on that, because it's literally like its own little entity taking care of itself.
So I guess what I will add to that is, Greeley has a build out north of 400,000 people. Right now they're at 125. Their plan is modularly designed to have 4 parallel treatment trains. They are currently on the first iteration of paying off the debt they took on the first plan. So every time they add a quadrant to this plant, they're spending hundreds of millions of dollars. So I think their argument is, why should we pay unilaterally for Evans growth, Evans additional 20,000 people in build out, when we have to also pay for our additional 300,000. Their enterprise fund is healthy, but their footprint is huge for the infrastructure they have to run for the infill development. And so they are running quite a huge system with 300,000 customers than they have right now. So I think and they're replacing $30+ million in lead service lines. So I would say, yes, they are in a good position, but I think what they would say is, you need to pay your way like you're any other customer. I believe we were given the same rate increase as all their other small towns this year. So I think it was a flat 7% to everyone else they're connected to, us, Windsor, Eaton, maybe. I'd have to look at their specific rate increases, but I think that's where they would come from, is we need to just pay our share of growth. And our option is we do that, or our option is we do that with Central Weld. And we're going to be doing with Central Weld regardless with NISP. So we're going to get that diversification.
Yeah, and that's kind of what we discussed at the retreat, is just that diversification, because we've been talking about it, but what does that look like for us in terms of, will that help with the cap?
Yes, absolutely. So every gallon that we take from Central Weld is a gallon that Greeley will not treat. The one difference that we probably need to be considerate of is the water that comes out of Greeley's Bellevue plant is right at the mouth of the Poudre Canyon. So it's a pretty high quality water when it's not coming from their Boyd Lake plant, which is kind of more down in Loveland. So I think if we were to go with Central Weld, when we bring NISP online, we probably will see a decrease in water quality. And that's something that'll be blended into the system, but something to account for when you are buying into Greeley's cap. You're buying into treatment at the top of the Poudre watershed there, and in terms of drinking water supplies, taking it in.
That's Evans as a whole is getting that quality of water, or is it specific areas?
We're getting CBT water delivered to their Bellevue plant.
So all Evans.
Correct. When they're running just that plant. When they're running their Loveland plant, I believe we get the proportion change.
That's right. Yeah, that's why I was
And
wondering.
you notice when it changes.
I do notice when it changes. That's why I was like, I don't think that's the case. So with that said, I mean, definitely let's consider diversifying.
Yeah, and their Boyd plant is a seasonal peaking plant, so it only runs during irrigation season. They run it, I think it's rated for almost 30 or more, and they run it at 7 to 8. So not only is it lower water quality, they use a ton of chemical in treating it because it doesn't taste great. It has some odor issues, and it's just a hotter water out of a shallower reservoir. So yeah, there's some reasons to consider alternatives.
And my biggest concern is just over the years of how much we're increasing our rates. And I know we can't control a lot of that. In order to continue to make Evans an affordable community, and everything like that, where, there's going to come a time where, people are just going to go, what's up with the water rates? And I know it's just not Evans. It's everywhere. But at the same time, we need to definitely look for ways to, one, either find a way to increase our cap, and two, to continue, as Councilmember Johnson just said, to diversify. Because there's only so much where we're going to be able to raise our rates, where people are just going to come in, fill these council chambers, and throw it.
I just want to add it really quick, because I know last year we raised prices with the pretext of not raising rates, because it was a significant raise. And so I just want to ensure that we keep to that and not constantly raise at high rates because of decisions we're making.
Yeah, the option there is, Greeley's going to pass their percentage, and we either pass it through or we absorb it. And so that'll be a conversation that we'll bring through the water board when we're given that information, and then we get to make a decision. Connecting
So-
to Central Weld. Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, connecting to Central Weld, I can't guarantee it's going to be less expensive in terms of the treatment capacity we get. We're still trying to just make sure that if we're going to take their customers, they're giving us water to serve them. That's kind of where we're at in that process, which is, it's challenging.
So, Central Weld's water rights, are they old enough that we would consider them to be safe in terms, I mean, because Greeley's one of the oldest water rights in the system.
Yeah, so it's generally CBT water. We take some Greeley Loveland Irrigation Company water as well, but it would be, I believe, pretty safe, stable water. I'm not sure exactly what their makeup is in terms of CBT. That would be a conversation that if we decide to take on these customers, we'd bring to the board. We would have a dedication agreement. I'm not sure exactly the process on legally how we take on customers and take on dedication, but I'm assuming that we'd have the opportunity to bring that in front of you to say, here's what the breakdown is of what they're proposing to dedicate. Here's what our EQRs recommend, kind of where's the negotiation makes sense. Because we are getting something from them, even though we're paying for it, we're getting that redundancy. So there's a give and take there, and we're going to keep pushing for Evan's interests.
How expensive is it to add non-pot? And the second part is, of course, it's painful to hear all this, but the message really is water conservation. You don't need to water the lawns as much, pull the lawns out. I don't know what kind of incentives we're giving to our residents to help with that transfer, but two questions of what's it going to cost for us to put a non-pot? And then is there anything, I know it's not cheap.
Yeah, you're talking about through this rest of the city that doesn't have it?
I'm just, in general,
$1 million.
giving all the information. And then what economic incentives do we give to residents?
So I think on the non-pot side, we'd be looking well north of 30 million. We kind of run into some Evans Ditch water decree usage. It can only be used in certain parts of the city. So then we're looking at Glick irrigation and where we can get that to. It really is a trade-off. We get lower water quality from it, so we do get a lot of resident complaints, especially if their sprinkler systems are designed for potable systems. They'll clog up every third or fourth day. So it's very expensive. Our engineering team, we look at it constantly as development comes in, development review. We always kind of flag where it's at. New developments are required to bring non-pot in. So I think we need to continue that, absolutely. On the incentives that exist, the state offers some programs. We kind of do our programs, which subsidizes basically landscape. We want to bring down outdoor water use, since that's our kind of peaking time. We do some toilet replacement work. So I can have Justine kind of give a conservation overview every year, maybe as part of this, that we could start baking into our annual water review, if that would be helpful.
That would be helpful, especially as residents start approaching. You can say, well, plan B is this. And it doesn't sound like non-pot is even an economic viable.
There definitely are a lot of programs out there that Justine does push, and she does get out there. Like the Garden in the Box, there's landscape replacement, to get some rebates to doing, replacing your lawn. There's these programs that we have where they'll come out from Fort Collins, and if you qualify, they'll replace your toilets with the low flow toilets, the low flow shower heads. They'll do your whole house. So there are a lot of programs that are offered out there, and there are some people that take advantage of it. But there's a lot of people that they want their green grass.
And the state's going to offer a few programs too, so they'll be subsidizing some of these lawn buyback programs. Standards on appliances keep going down in terms of water use, flushing for toilets. So the market is driving a lot of conservation. It's really the retrofits that's where we can have our inroads. Sorry to interrupt.
I was just going to use the analogy, when gas prices were high, when low, everyone had big cars. When gas prices skyrocketed, fuel efficiency was the number one topic. So that's what I'd like to know is if there's a way that we can start sending that information to our customers saying, hey, look, gas prices are going to start going up. Of the cap forecast, have you been able to break it down to actual household consumption to irrigation? Or is that too muddled based on seasonal? I mean, have you based this information? I'm just trying to figure out, like, how did you capture the forecast in acreage feet?
Let's see. There's a couple of things going on. So we're in the process of gaining smarter meters that give us more readily readouts every 15 minutes to get that resolution. Right now, we don't really have the capacity to do much with that data. Where that really informs us is infrastructure sizing. So if more water is being used all at once, then we have to upsize. If we can level that peak, then we get to use smaller pipes. It's less expensive. That's kind of the huge gain in that resolution. In terms of looking at the data, January through March and November, December, that's what we consider average winter consumption. So that's roughly the usage we anticipate because nothing's going on outside. When we start looking at those irrigation months, we can look at the difference and say, okay, this is the chunk that's being used for potable outdoor water demand. We do have some metered non-pot customers. We also have some unmetered, so that creates some challenges measuring how much is being used out of the ditch or in some of the flat rate subdivisions. In terms of per capita, Peter and I actually talked about this. So with the new housing developments that are coming in, we have a pretty good understanding of what we require them to dedicate as in terms of our assumption for the water rights they need to provide. Our home housing units are smaller with less outdoor irrigation. So per capita, we definitely think we're seeing a decrease, but we don't actively go out and measure it. That's kind of a goal of mine here in the near future is to start building out our asset management and GIS that would allow us to map, say, non-functional turf that just have a better understanding of where that water is going in our system. That's just a layer of data resolution you see at bigger utilities where we're just a little bit lagging behind that kind of cutting edge of innovation and data analytics.
The only reason why I ask is clearly we need to get ahead of this. And if we can find out where the data points are that are driving water usage, which I would suspect would be irrigation, then there's a cost-benefit analysis that we can run through that we can analyze how much money can we marketing-wise to get the message out to water conservation versus the backlash of us raising water rates. And that was the whole purpose of that question. So if you ever think about that, let me know.
That's all I think about.
Can we, I know we talked about it earlier, can we go back to Greeley and say, see what it would possibly cost us and maybe negotiate something with them to raise our cap, let's just say to 3,000 acre feet? Because where our cap is, what, 27? What would it cost the city to go up to 3,000? Another 300 acre feet.
I can dive through. So we renewed their contract right before I started, I believe, because I was at Greeley at the time. So it's pretty recent that we came up with the fair market value, and we can purchase whatever we want. It just has to live in the terms of that agreement per acre foot. I don't have it off the top of my head, but I think so we're at 2,700.
2766.
So that gets us to 29 something. So we're at that 4 million to get to 29, and I don't know specifically what it is, but I can look at the agreement and get back to you on that.
I'd just like to see what it would be. Just curious.
I'm also curious because I know Willowbrook is not metered. What do we know how much water that subdivision uses during April through October?
It's on the non-pot system, so we generally don't really look at it because it doesn't play into the cap conversation.
Okay, good. I didn't know it was under the non-pot.
Yeah, they have separate hookups there, luckily. Now, that's not to say that people don't use it.
To the non-pot. That's what happened. Okay.
Yeah. So it's some humbling numbers, but we're keeping a very close eye on it. We're exploring our options. But I think as the kind of conclusions are is we need to make sure we're prepared if a deal can't be made, if Central Weld is unwilling to give us the water rights we need, to just keep funding that cap account and be aware that there's no getting around this. This is something we have to pay for, and even if we want to hold our rates stagnant, we'll still have their inflationary pressures that come to us and this. So it's kind of a compounding effect.
I do agree with what Councilmember Crabtree stated, that we need to, the outreach and really start to, talk about conservation with our community. And I can tell you, just even like neighbors sometimes are like, oh, like, I was like, we had to kind of let them know it's, know when you're supposed to water your lawn, because a lot of people didn't know that.
They don't care.
Or there's that too, but just kind of pushing that out.
Yeah, we send out like a schedule that shows how per month, depending on your sprinkler type, how many minutes it should be on for. I think this comes down to the community engagement side we talked to on Saturday. How can we be more effective at pushing our info? And that's something in utilities we really need to consider of how do we get people to, if we got 100 comments on the McDonald's development, how do we get 100 comments on sprinkler watering time? And I don't know if we'll ever get there, but we can try some different outreach ways.
I mean, I've come across people that flat out just said, you know when the watering schedule is, and they don't care. But then they complain why their water bill's so high. And I'm like, well, you're using potable water to keep your grass green, and you're watering it in the middle of the day. and then you tell them, and they're like, well, why is my water bill so high? I just answered your question, and they just keep, well, I'm not tearing out my lawn. I'm going to have a green lawn. Well, then you're going to pay for it.
Well, I'll just say hats off to Jackie for leading the rates effort, because part of having our tiered structure is the people that are abusing the what we're trying to put forth to be responsible with our water resources. They're going to pay their fair share of the bill, and that's a huge win for us.
So I'm kind of curious with Jackie's data. I think there was 4 tiers in that. If we got everyone to drop, if there's 4 or 5, it doesn't matter. If we could get everyone to drop to the maximum 2 tier, how would that affect our forecasted water rates? I asked that question before already.
We can do a deep dive into that. It would be interesting to see if every resident was using tier 1 and tier 2, where we'd be. I anticipate it would be in a pretty healthy spot compared to our cap.
I just want to say that I did see all summer multiple posts regarding the saving the money garden in a box, the watering schedules. I'm not on Facebook, but I am on Instagram. I saw it multiple times last year, but the community engagement, getting people to participate, that's where the problem is. And even my HOA, we just had our meeting, and we had people complaining about their neighbors overwatering, causing problems with their sidewalk. Now we're on the non-potable water, but the water is always going to be an issue. And I really wish we could, I don't know how to say this, even if it sounds right, but if there would be a way to shut off water for a certain time, especially for yards. I know,
parents did
that's
it to
bad,
us.
Tammy. Bad.
You're in the shower too often.
Oh, you couldn't turn the hose on outside of my house. You got in trouble. But really, it's getting people to care, and we've really got to get out there and communicate.
I think it's happening right now too, and you're right, and I appreciate staff for their work and the information, because it's inevitable. We're not going to get away from this. But as the fire heats up, sending that message out, I'm making behavioral changes because I don't want a large water bill. So I think it's a 2-part.
So we have a specific account in the water fund for the cap.
Yes, we have a specific cap account that we've been funding.
Do we know where that's sitting at today?
I believe it's just north of $2 million. 4.3, double. So, and the other thing I just kind of wanted to add on the conservation front is we are really lucky to, as part of, we're heavily bought into CBT and Northern Water System, so we get the benefits of their conservation messaging. They just reached out to Justine, Rick, and I about a new campaign they're trying to roll out. They're trying to figure out at what level. For us smaller communities that maybe have one person in terms of conservation, or some of our neighbors have none, it's a huge resource that really helps with the regional messaging. So we will take advantage of anything that is kind of part of our assessment fees that we get, and we'll use it.
How can we get that out to the, like, open up a board or committee that we would then push? Okay, we can talk about that.
Well, no, there was a resident that approached us, actually Willard's wife, and she wanted to do something like that. Maybe if she's still interested. Sharon?
Thank you.
Anything else?
Yeah. For decades, the Water and Sewer Board and past city councils have treated the non-pot system as a separate enterprise fund, which it is not. And they have required dual pot systems and not supplied the non-pot water to the systems. The cost of treating and putting on the water is tremendous, but people just complain about the price. They don't realize what they're doing sometimes. And going from 1,000 flushes per day to 200 flushes per day is not saving you that much water compared to the treated water that you're putting on the lawns. And I think that we really need to focus on getting the non-pot system throughout the city. And I know it's expensive and it doesn't pay back, but it will pay back. It may take longer, but it will pay back because you're not paying constantly to treat the water and put it on your grass. And that's where your problem is, not with a leaky toilet that's maybe using up 100 gallons of water a day.
I agree with you. I mean, outdoor irrigation is, we could see the numbers in that chart. It is the huge spike we see every year. We know what's going on to grass. I managed Greeley's non-pot system, and I saw the huge benefits they had by continuing to expand it out. But we're in a pretty similar boat to them, where we've gotten the low-hanging fruit, and what's left is running oversized infrastructure for long runs to small, single lots. It's inherently expensive. There is maintenance associated with diversions off the ditch. But our engineering team, like I said, every time a development or redevelopment comes in, we are looking through the lens of what has to happen here in terms of water. That is at the forefront of every development review that we undertake. So I am with you. I am a full proponent of non-pot. I would love that if we could serve every single house. It's that trade-off, and as opportunities come up, we can continue to have that prioritization conversation of where non-pot fits, and buying into the CAP fund and other things as well.
We're just never going to get the conservation we need from people going to low flush toilets and conserving water, not running the water. I know a lot of people used to run the water when they constantly when they shaved or brushed their teeth, and it's like, why don't you shut the water off? When I was there visiting, and but you're just not going to get the conservation you need, and it's just wasteful. When I was on the water audit committee back in 2004, that was one of the first things I noticed, is you're spending all this money to treat the water, and then you're putting in most of it on your lawn during the summer. It's ridiculous. And we've got to figure out some way to get off of that. And then going to untreated water to put on the lawn is the only way you're going to do that. And then you're gonna lower the amount of treated water that people are using, and you're gonna be able to, go for maybe a couple of decades before you're even getting close to that cap again, depending on growth.
True, but at a $30 million cost.
I don't wanna tell the chief that we're gonna
I mean,
use the money for, that from the police station to put non-pot in. And he's saying no too, and now I'm even more scared. So I mean, that's the
People
thing.
would revolt against that, because if you try to pay, $30 million has got to be passed on somewhere.
Yep.
And that's gonna raise the water bill so astronomically, people are gonna be like, well, I'm not in for that. I'm gonna just use my potable water, I don't care, because to them, I mean, yeah, I may not pay for it in the long run, but at the end of the day, several years down the line, but people aren't gonna go for such an increase in their water bill to pay for a $30 million non-pot system to be put through the entire city. They're not going to.
Some conversations that may end up happening is continue to push people towards more water efficient landscapes, grasses. This council is going to have some tough decisions on beautification versus water use. Just something to keep in the back of your mind as we bring our conservation update. Kyle.
I was just gonna say, think of Ward 1 specifically as well. I mean, I don't know the exact number ratio, but I would say probably half of yards are already non-existent as it is. So, I mean, there's, that's already a challenge to battle in itself, but those houses are already not even using external water. So just,
It'd be nice if we could find a way to get some money to maybe offset the cost. I mean, I know we already have a little bit of funding, but increase it to where, hey, if you tear out your front yard and you do some kind of
Xeriscape
or something, say it cost you $2,500, where we could have an incentive of, say, I'm just using a number as
No,
an example.
I would pay $2,500 right
Right,
now.
We'll give you up to 35, 40% of the cost. Maybe that would be an incentive or something like that. I mean, I'm just trying to look at ways to, because I know I did. I ripped up my lawn a few years ago, and other than the trees and the little garden that I have, I don't have to water anything.
I like where you're heading, because even thinking about as we start developing and houses start to get built, maybe working with, the builders and saying, hey, let's, offer like xeriscaping options instead of putting, grass down and stuff like that. Or even if that can be part of our master plan and stating that there has to be X amount of xeriscape per subdivision, because that's also something we can.
Or just,
We
they all
talked
have to
about
be.
that.
Well, they all have to be.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
talked about that the
Yeah,
last
we've
couple of
talked about
years
that, yeah.
because I've really wanted to push for that. Even but where we run into stuff is when you have an HOA, like I do, you have to have a green lawn and all this. And
But
It-
HOAs can
yeah.
no longer dictate that anymore
yes,
per the new
I
state.
heard that,
So-
but I don't think residents know that.
Yeah.
You know what
I
I
mean,
mean?
it's something we can take, start looking at,
Exactly.
Right.
That's something that we can put into city code, that we can almost create.
Yeah, it's something that we can look at.
There will be pushback just in my experience of communities when you try to take green lawns instead of incentivize. That's why the state's doing the kind of $1 or $2 a square foot. I do anticipate there would be RV-like feedback on that.
I agree. No, and what I meant is new development,
Yep.
not going through and doing.
no.
We would.
Moving forward.
we don't
But
want
I mean,
that
and
shop
that's
again.
why do X amount, not totality, you know what I mean? And
I'm
then
thinking about
providing those options and also incentives as we look forward and what that looks like. Because if we can even say, piggyback off of the state coming in and providing those incentives, I mean, it just works out.
The new developments do have non-pot that come in, so that's part of it. Liberty Draw is really pretty small lots, efficient systems, non-pot. A lot of them are dog owners. That's a challenge with xeriscaping is you kind of end up with a buildup of waste, and then you have to rinse that. When I was at Greeley, we struggled with people trying to put different artificial turfs down. They degrade. What's the cutoff for how you do code enforcement on degrading turf? We had someone that took the remnants of a high school football field and put it in their front yard all misaligned. And it was like, how do you as a city?
I think I've seen something.
Yeah, I was gonna
like
say, feel free to come to my neighborhood. You'll
Yeah,
see.
Yeah.
it was not in Evans. It was out of town, but it's the same thing. Is how do you then enforce on some of these things that people are spending $10,000 to put in artificial turf? It degrades in 8 years. What happens in year 7 when it looks bad? So all things to consider. I appreciate your engagement with this. It's stressful.
I do appreciate staff for being ahead of the ball, and I think the economics of price it's just going to drive natural changes. So,
Just one last question about Weld Central. If we tap into them, would that service all of Evans, or would it only would that water be 100% of the water going to certain areas? Would it be blended with Greeley water somehow?
Generally, it would be blended. So we have, I think, 14 master meters with Greeley that, kind of blend into our way. Central Weld, depending on the numbers, would come up. The blending wouldn't be 100% complete. So if we do take on some of those customers along the enhanced pipeline, they'd be getting mostly Central Weld. Unless there's an outage, then the Greeley would kind of take over with an interconnect. So it wouldn't be a complete blend because we'd be connecting at different parts of the system, but it would be equilibrium for most of the city.
Anything else? Ty, excellent.
yeah,
Presentation.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. All right, next up on our agenda is the recreation needs assessment update. Hear from Ty.
All right, good evening, Mr. Mayor, Council. I was going to have Jen introduce Mike tonight, but Jen has had a family emergency and can't be here. So we should have Mike Schvetz on YouTube. He's going to give you a little kind of up-to-date refresher on the recreation needs assessment, something that our master plan from 2022 identified. We put Pros Consulting under contract several months ago. He's going to kind of bring you up to speed where we're at and where we're headed, and I'll turn it over to Mike.
Sure. Thanks, Ty. Hopefully everybody can hear me. I'm wondering, though, I do want to share my screen to kind of run through a quick overview of the project, and I'm currently not available to do that on Zoom. So I want to see if that's possible.
Mike, it doesn't look like it's allowing me to add you as a co-host to share your screen.
Ooh, okay.
I can pull the PowerPoint up, the presentation, and if you just tell me to advance, I'm good with
Sure.
that.
I can do that as well. Sounds good. Okay. So yes, if you could pull that up, that would be fantastic. And then we'll just do the next slide drill. All right. Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity, Mayor and Council, to provide you kind of a brief overview and get any questions, concerns, comments, suggestions that you may have with regards to the future of recreation in the city of Evans. So next slide. So there's a lot of different factors that we want to consider as we think about this, what's needed, where and why, what the vision is for rec programs, really keeping this focused on your residents specifically as part of this process. What are the needs of the community? What are the experiences that they want through recreation? And what is the operational and fiscal impact, which of course is really important to creating an implementable, realistic, and financially sustainable needs assessment and recommendations for you all. Next slide. Really just a quick overview of the project. It's what are the needs and expectations of the community, but also what are the mandates and the resources and or opportunities and barriers associated with those resources that we have to live within. And that in turn, of course, will help to determine where we take recreation, both in terms of programs and facilities in the city of Evans. Next slide. Next slide, real quick. So we want to talk about demographics. So why is demographics important? Obviously, recreation is all about experiences provided to your community. And we recognize that from a population perspective, it helps us understand how to right size things. We also understand that from an age segment perspective, families with young kids have very, very different recreational needs than folks that are 55, 60 years old and complete empty nesters. Or don't have any kids at home. And so, and then another component is race and ethnicity. But from a population perspective, we derive all of this information from the Environmental Systems Research Institute, affectionately known as ESRI. They're the global leader in demographic and market data. However, we are happy to interface this information with any other resources that you feel are important to you all, and also to be consistent with potentially other planning efforts. But that said, we do recognize that your community is around 22,000 folks and projected through ESRI to grow to about 26,000. We feel really comfortable with the 2029 and 2034 projections. I think once you start getting out beyond that, it certainly has a way of really needing more of a crystal ball to understand what that potentially looks like. But your growth rate, annual growth rate, is a little bit higher than the city or the state of Colorado. And we also know that your household size is greater than the state of Colorado, 2.83 versus 2.49. Next slide. In terms of age segmentation, you're a younger community. And I think this is important to recognize, number one. But number two, you're also very balanced from an age segmentation perspective. So if we think about it through the lens of just median age, you're at about 31.7. The state is at 38. Your 55 and older population is only 18%, and the state as a whole is 27.5. Even if you project out to 2039, and you think about your 55 and older population, it's still only projected to be somewhere around 23%, which is still significantly lower than the projections for the state and the country as a whole. What this really means is that you're not skewed in one direction or the other. When it comes to meeting recreational experiences, needs in the community, you're going to have a lot of irons in all of the different fires based on where people are at in their life modes. So we can't necessarily say, you know what, your community is going to be really, really young or your community is going to be really, really old. It just means that we're going to have to really find that sweet spot in terms of balancing resources and being able to meet needs. Next slide. In terms of race and ethnicity, why is this important? Well, number one, we understand that race and ethnicity helps to inform cultural preferences. And cultural preferences, of course, help to influence recreation preferences. And so from a race perspective, these are what the race segments as defined by the U.S. Census. White alone is 54%. Your state is 68, and the U.S. is around 60. You're projected to be at about 40% white alone in 15 years. So you will have a minority majority associated with that racial segment. The Hispanic population, as of right now, is not considered to be a major race segment through the U.S. Census. Now there is some discussion about making it that, but as of right now, it is a subset of all of the other racial segments as defined by the census. So you can be white alone and be Hispanic. You can be Black alone and you could be Hispanic, American Indian and be Hispanic. But long story short, your Hispanic population is 50%, and is expected to grow to about 55% in the next 15 years. In terms of, next slide, sorry, I was scrolling. We want to do a market analysis. So this is just a quick snapshot of looking at fitness as an initial take. We will refine this and define this later, and I'll explain how. But next slide kind of gives you a sense of, hey, you know what? Most of the fitness competition, private sector, nonprofit sector, even public offerings, is in Greeley. You don't have a lot of quote unquote fitness, shall we say, competition within your geopolitical boundaries. But we do know that there's a lot of offerings to the north there in Greeley. What we will do with this market component or this market assessment is start to understand the prioritization of need of recreation experiences from your community. Once we understand that, we'll go back and refine the market analysis based on really understanding if the needs of your community should be met by you all, and or if you should look to partner and or divest of potentially pushing those needs to be met by others. We just want to make sure that we're not overextending your reach, but we also want to understand what your niche is or your niches are as it relates to providing services. So this will be refined as we go through the process. Next slide. So community engage. Oh, yes. And there's a question. Okay. So for the community engagement perspective, next slide. We really kind of take a collaborative engagement process associated with this. The community is at the beginning of this. Next slide. And so we've conducted focus group interviews, we're conducting public meetings, and we're doing a statistically valid survey to try and give people as many opportunities to participate in this process as possible. Next slide. The statistically valid survey is currently out on the street, and expect to have an update on that here towards the end of the month, and hopefully have some results for you in February. We are looking at 300 household completed surveys. I know it's hard to imagine, can you get a statistically valid survey with just 300 households? There is an entire methodology behind this. This is being administered by ETC Institute out of Olathe, Kansas. This is the business that they are in. They do this all over the country, primarily for parks and recreation and transportation projects. However, as long as we have geographic balance across the city and demographically representative of your community, we will feel confident that if we did this survey 100 times, that we would get the same results 95 out of 100 times within that margin of error. ETC Institute is exceptional at this work. They have, of the last 80 bond referendums that have been put out on the street for voters to consider across the country, in part based on their survey results, all 80 have passed. So we feel really confident that this is going to give us a really dialed in approach to understanding not just what the users of your current Parks and Recreation system want, but also what non-users want from you as well. Next slide. So this will result in an example. This is just an example of that priority investment rating. It'll give us a sense of what people want more of, which is the high priority, what you kind of have right sized, which is the medium priority, and what are some of those niche programs that are geared towards specific interests, specific age groups, and so on and so forth. Low priority does not mean that you don't do them. It just means that you have a really small select market around which you provide those programs to people. Next slide. We will also then, as mentioned earlier, be able to cross-tabulate this by, in particular, household type, life mode, as mentioned. As you go through life, you have very different recreation experiences based on your lifestyle, your family size, where you're at in that life mode. And so we really want to give your recreation division the opportunity to know what specific age groups want out of the Parks and Recreation system. Next slide. We are also conducting a facility assessment of your current community center. Next slide. This is being conducted by Barker Rinker CCAT. They are an architect firm out of Denver. They are well versed in the development and construction of construction of many recreation facilities across the country, but in particular in the state of Colorado. We have worked with them for several years and have found them to be excellent But they are really just looking at interior and exterior, current spaces, physical condition, infrastructure, functional uses. This is really, really important to understand how your space functions, especially given that it was designed many moons ago. And is it up to how people want to recreate going forward as opposed to how they were perceived to recreate in the past? And then, of course, documenting all of this information. Next slide. We will do a program assessment and recommendations. Next slide. This helps us understand, kind of where you're at from a program perspective, whether or not we're going to expand, whether you're going to continue, whether you're going to continue to seek out partnerships. We will identify what you should be focusing on and also identify the space and place that's necessary to support the programs and services that you have. Next slide. We will evaluate partnerships and partnership opportunities. The business of being government being in the business of being the sole direct provider of park and recreation provisions going forward is years gone by. And so we really want to identify and understand where there are partnerships and or what the staffing requirements would be to meet community need. Next slide. So from a partnership perspective, it could be complementary users, healthcare providers, potentially other service providers such as your library, and or ongoing partners and sponsors such as youth sport organizations. Next slide. As mentioned, we'll start to understand how to align your organization to provide the shall we say, the lines of service or functions that are necessary to meet community need. And we're going to really focus on recreation and admin services as part of this study. Next slide. And then what does that mean in terms of projected staffing level? These again, all of these are just examples of the work that we can produce, but really understanding what it would take from a staffing and resource perspective. Whether or not you have partnerships will obviously impact this, but meeting needs just doesn't happen without having staff dedicated to doing so. Next slide. And the financial plan. Next slide. And so we really look at this through the lens of total cost of ownership. The capital investment that's necessary, as mentioned, staffing is a large component of that operational budget that you approve annually. And then, of course, life cycle replacement. Anything you build or construct, nothing lasts forever. So we want to take into consideration all three of those components as we think about recommendations so that you go into this with eyes wide open. Next slide. Our facility recommendation options and cost estimates will be rooted in that total cost of ownership. We're looking at it in three specific buckets. Repair. Just what are the repair items associated with your existing facility for the next 15 years? Are there opportunities to renovate? So making strategic changes to the facility that include significant renovations or repurposing of spaces to meet community need. And then the third option that we will present to you is replace. Thinking about, okay, this facility just is not going to cut it going forward. So what would that site agnostic kind of prototypical floor plan look like for a new multi-gen recreation center for a community like Evans? BRS has a number of these that they are ready to unveil, but we also want to make sure you understand what those cost estimates are within that total cost of ownership methodology. Next slide. All of this will roll up into not just a cost estimating plan for capital improvements, but a 5 or 6 year pro forma, which basically is a very detailed line item budget that understands where you have opportunities to capture revenue and where you have what the expenditures are going to be, including personnel, non-personnel costs. And then what not only in terms of just revenue and expenses, but what would that mean to your general fund in terms of subsidy? Sometimes we love to talk about cost recovery, but cost recovery in a vacuum is different, right? So 77% of a $2 million budget our $2.5 million budget is about $580,000. But if your budget was, and again, I'm just making these numbers up, but if it was half that, then a 77% cost recovery would mean that your general fund subsidy would be about 290,000. So though we love to focus on these percentages, we really want to focus on the dollars and cents to give you a sense of what it is that you would be investing from taxpayer dollars into any one of the recommendations that come forth. Next slide. So at this point, we'll take any questions, concerns, comments, suggestions that you have. Appreciate your time and attention to this, but we are really trying to take a holistic approach to understanding community needs, how that interfaces with your current operations, and how does that play out to capital recommendations for you all in terms of how to develop spaces and places necessary to meet community need. And then, of course, what are the financial implications of it?
Great, thank you so much. So Ty, I do have a question for you. Is this going to be presented to the Parks and Rec Advisory Committee?
Did it just last week.
Okay, perfect.
Correct.
Awesome, great. Any other questions? Oh, open it up for discussion.
Well, I do. I think, I love the fact that we're looking at it at a holistic level, because I think that's important. I think we're able to also possibly get funding like through those block grants if we take that approach. So that can help if we decide in the future to do an additional rec center. But looking at your list of kind of like priorities where you have it listed as high, medium, and low, I think, granted, you did state, I'll preface with you stating that you did state, I mean, just because it's there doesn't mean that it's low or high, what have you. But one of the things recently in our community, especially Weld County, CCAP, which is the child care, paused. And it's been, even Larimer County paused it. So that's one of the, it's a critical resource in for our community, especially the younger communities are trying to get into the workforce, and they help subsidize daycare. And so with that being paused or not taking any new people, it will make it difficult for the community as we move forward. So even having, thinking of like after school like programs would be great, or even think, adding the childcare, which I saw it listed, would be important, especially when it comes to like recreating. But in addition to that, one of the things that I have noticed, just because I have young kids, children, our basketball is very, very sought after. And I can tell you from other cities, people really come to Evans really to like do that specific sport, as well as all the other ones, but that one in specific. And not only that, there's various, Greeley, they come, I have a lot of friends that their kids come to Evans because they like the structure that it has, which is different than Greeley. And some, parents are always looking for different ways to kind of engage their kids. So just something, suggestions, thoughts, comments that I have.
Well, I just thought the
Appreciate
entire
it.
point of getting this done was so that the community would tell us what they wanted, but who am I?
You're part of the community.
Well, I think, I'm glad that we formed the Parks and Rec Advisory Committee, because I think this is actually what you presented to us and what was presented to them as well is a great foundation of what we need to learn and what our community wants. And I know their purpose is going to be out there, working to get this plan implemented based on what the surveys come out and say, and really deep dive into that. One of the things that I've kind of looked at, and I know that we are behind. I've been saying this for years and everything. Majority of our community for their recreation needs go outside of Evans. What do we need to do to bring them here? They have Greeley, which has, they have 2 great rec centers. They have with indoor pool, indoor tracks, great amenities and all that stuff. I would like to bring our Evans residents back into Evans and have a facility, something like that. And I know that costs a lot of money. And one thing I looked at was, the community of Eaton. Eaton has a small, a good rec center. It's a good size that has its own special district. And they go out and they can bond and they can go out and have mill levies for that. And their membership fees pay for that self. And that's something that maybe, we might have to consider for our community as well.
Yep. In fact, that I believe is a facility that was designed by BRS Architects, who is on our team. And I believe that that is probably one of those prototypical kind of new facilities that will be presented as part of this, as part of one of the options for you all to consider. Thank you for that feedback.
The question I have is, and I'm having a hard time answering it, why is annual income not calculated into your equations? A household demographic that's making $250,000 a year has different demands than a household that's making $100,000 a year. Is there a reason why you're not bringing annual income into that data analysis?
No, we will. I was just trying to keep the presentation short and sweet, but that is one factor that will be considered as well. You're totally spot on. Typically, the more disposable income people have, the less reliant they are on public parks and recreation for their recreation experiences, because they have more means and they have more opportunity to tap into either other nonprofits and or private sectors. Folks that make less disposable income become more reliant on your public park and recreation provisions. And so that is certainly something that we will take into consideration. And in fact, probably something that we can cross-tabulate as a survey result for you all.
Question, great answer.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions, comments?
I guess for your assessment, are you going to include like kind of things that are happening within like the Weld community that in essence would help kind of provide understanding what those needs are? Like for example, like how I mentioned CCAP, like that like being paused, because that can definitely change the way people answer things. If like there was kind of a mention of like, or a formulated question to kind of provide or extract some kind of data point.
Yeah, the survey tool is currently on the street. However, I think there's ways in which we can understand the influence of that quote unquote environmental condition. In other words, something that potentially can impact somebody's need based on their responses to such things as after-school programs, such things as potential childcare opportunities. And so I think it's a matter of that's a nuance that is unique to maybe not necessarily you all just specifically, but it is a nuance specific to this study that we would take into consideration. We can't. I think it's important to recognize that your feedback is really, really critical to help us understand how to evaluate the results of the survey, through that more critical lens as opposed to just taking them at face value. So, for example, the nuance that you just mentioned is one of those potential reasons that we can start to understand the why people responded to the survey the way that they did. It also is something that we could factor into that market analysis study that will follow up the statistically valid survey.
Have you all taken the survey?
I have not.
I was actually going to ask, you said it's on the street. Where can someone access it? I have not even seen it.
I was on Facebook. That's how I
It's
took it.
I'm not on social.
Yeah, it's a random sampling of residents. The idea is it's not an opportunity, an open-ended survey that everybody has the opportunity to take. That's what makes, in part, it statistically valid, that it's a random sampling of your community. So not everybody receives a survey, but some folks will have the ability to take it by mail. They could take it by phone. You could take it by Facebook. You could take it online. If you are selected by ETC Institute to receive a survey, you would have that opportunity to do so.
Okay, that's good to know, because I took it on Facebook. So I must have got that invitation then. So
Yeah.
And did I miss?
Correct.
What was your population pool on that data? Did you say
It
300?
was about the total amount of survey results.
No, how
that
many
we,
surveys are going to be out there?
Oh, it's usually about 5 to 6 times the amount of surveys that we get back. So we would typically look at about 1,500 households would receive the survey, and we would expect shooting for 300 of those back. If we get 350, we get 400. We'll count all of them. It just means that the margin of error decreases.
That seems like a small population pool.
It is, and I
1,500?
think that's well. So here's
Well,
here's
with-
a couple of. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, he was.
Oh, I
saying-
was just going to say that there is a really scientific based methodology behind it. I am happy to supply that as shall I say a sleeping aid for you all if you so choose. But it is it's very easy to understand, but yet it's complex. I've answered this question like 4 different times today as part of another project. But if you asked a community of 1 million people, say Louisville, Kentucky, that if they like chocolate ice cream, vanilla ice cream, or Neapolitan ice cream, and it was demographically and geographically representative of that community, you would need a grand total of 375 households to respond for it to be statistically valid. I know that just seems crazy to understand that, but it is the methodology that ETC has in place that has been tried and true time and time again as it comes to the results of these surveys.
And I have one last question. Based
Sure.
off kind of like the results, are we gonna tie? Are we tying them to specific grants that are available out there?
We will look at funding strategies that you have available to you. We can also do some grant data mining specific to it. The granting world is volatile at best. And typically the granting world is really tied to capital improvements, certainly not ongoing sustainable operational impacts. But that is certainly something that we can look at as part of potential funding strategies to help implement the recommendations that come forth.
The only other thing that I wasn't quite done with my question was, based on your population, you also said the geographical region, you're also taking that into account and you'll be able to show that returning data.
We are taking into account your geopolitical boundaries.
That's
So the
correct.
city of Evans,
Yep.
when correct.
Yeah, so Ward 1, 2, and 3. And you'll show that information, that data, not who participated, but in your population report of
Yes.
the percentages of
Yes.
each of those wards. Okay.
Um,
I like statistics, so I just want to make sure that our data that we're collecting is accurate and it's not out of balance. Say 80% of it's coming from Ward 1. Ward 1's
Yeah,
social
no,
demographics going to be completely different, which would skew the data.
correct. It would not be statistically valid if we got 80% of results from Ward 1 and then 10% from Ward 2 and Ward 3, simply because we know that each of your wards has about the same amount of population. And so we would expect that within like 30 to 35% for each one of those wards to be represented as part of the survey.
Sure, as long as you let us know that, that's all I'm asking.
Oh, absolutely. Have to. Otherwise we can't say that it's statistically significant.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, any other more questions or comments? No? All right. Well, thank you so much. Appreciate the information. It's good information, and look forward to hearing more once the survey results coming out.
You got it. Thank you, Mayor and Council. Appreciate your time, attention, and comments. Very helpful for us.
Great, thank you. I do appreciate it.
Have a great evening.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Bye.
Mike. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anything else from staff?